This week my biker in need of a little helping hand is Ian Smart from Livingston in Scotland, who's brought his 1968 BSA Starfire down, which has seen rather better days. Now this of course is a British classic, so it's a little bit different to the Japanese fours that I usually work on for bread and butter. And if we can get the thing to start at the end of his visit, Ian will be very happy. Well, welcome to the workshop, Ian.
It's a pleasure to be here, Rod.
And I guess you've had a little bit of trouble with this bike.
Yeah, it's really difficult for me to start it. It will start, but I don't know whether there's something that's wrong with the bike or whether it's just my technique, 'cause it's the first British bike that I've actually owned.
Do you mind if I ever got starting it up myself?
By all means.
Let's see what she does. So, ignition switch is down here. Right, so we turn the ignition on. There's a fuel tap on this side as well. And am I right in thinking you have to prime the carburettor on this one?
Yes, you do, yeah.
Okay, so if we give that a little bit of a tickle there. Although this is the old British jargon, tickle its carburettor. Right, let's give it a kick and see what happens. No, that doesn't want to go, does it?
See what I mean? It is difficult to get going.
Yeah. To be frank, yeah, look at that. I don't know if you can tell what's happening there, but the Kickstarter isn't turning the engine over every time I kick it. That's actually getting a wee bit soggy. I suspect that what may be happening is the clutch might be slipping slightly. So what I'd like to do before we get too involved in the engine, let's just have a quick look at the clutch and see if we can adjust that and then make sure it's kicking over properly every time. Okay? Let's get the bike up on the bench and then we can actually see what we're working with.
Okay.
BSA stands for Birmingham Small Arms and started life in 1854 as an association of gunsmiths formed to supply arms to the Crimean War. It started making bikes at the turn of the century and became for a while the world's largest manufacturer of motorbikes. In the 1960s, some of BSA's finest models were produced before its eventual decline and bankruptcy as it steadfastly refused to acknowledge the threat from Japanese bikes. Ian's BSA is brought for me to look at today is from 1968 and is a road bike called the Starfire. The Starfire represents the last of the line of an iconic number of British BSA singles which became key bikes in the 1960s. So here's a bike up on the bench. Now let's have a look at this clutch adjustment and see what we can do. Well, Ian, to adjust your clutch, there's a little inspection cap here if you have a look at this one. What I'm going to do is just whip that cap off there and there should be an adjuster screw inside it.
Okay.
Hopefully that's all it'll need, but here's where we find out. With that cap out of the way, inside there, can you see that?
Yeah.
There's an adjuster screw there and a lock nut on it. Now that's actually the end of the clutch push rod. I've put some slack in the clutch cable, so that's nice and loose. Got to do that first. And the next thing I'm going to do now is just slacken that lock nut off there. There we go. From right, that socket should just about fit that. Of course, this bike is British, so all the sizes are imperial. But right, I've now slackened that lock nut off. Now, if you have a look at that adjuster, to be set correctly, I wind it in so it touches the end of the push rod, and then back it off about a quarter of a turn, and it should lock up there. Now then, the bad news is that was actually set okay, so that's not the problem, unfortunately. I think what we're going to have to do then, in order to examine this fault a bit more detail, is take this cover off.
Okay.
And let's actually have a look at the clutch in there. Are you up for having a go at that?
Yeah. We'll have a go at this.
This is where your adventure with your British bike really starts.
That's what it's all about.
Okay. It shouldn't be too difficult a job. In order to get this cover off and have a look at the gubbins underneath, we're first of all going to have to get this stuff out of the way. This is a rear brake pedal, which I'm hoping will pivot down far enough to be out of the way of where we're working. Of course it won't at the moment, but there's an adjuster screw there. So if I wind this adjuster screw back, what I'm actually doing is putting lots of slack in the rear brake adjustment. So that should allow us to push the brake pedal down. You see, I'm getting some more slack in that as we go. Now, while I'm doing that, if you can have a go at taking this footrest off, it's all done with a single bolt there, and strange as it may seem, I think you'll find an 18mm spanner will fit, although it may not be what BSA originally specified. Anyway, shall we have a crack at this?
Okay.
That's most of the oil out. I've left the drain tray there just so it catches any little residual bits that come out.
Okay.
Now to get this cover off, we've got all these screws around the edge of it. These are crosshead screws. They should, if we're lucky, just undo like that. Have a go and see what you find. We sometimes find that these are quite tight though and they may need just a little bit of persuasion.
Oh, that one's come straight out.
Good, right. Before you take each one out, just work around and loosen them all off. And it isn't really necessary on a bike, on a casting this small, but it's good workshop procedure to kind of work diagonally rather than go around.
Alright,
So what I'll do, now you've got these two loose, try loosening these two down here. And if you just work in a nice diagonal sequence, it means the cover comes loose evenly. And hopefully it'll stop it ever leaking oil, which of course British bikes never do. Now what have we done so far? Well, the first thing we've done is take this outer cover off so we can actually get to the clutch and gubbins underneath. And the first tip that I've given Ian is to take the screws off diagonally. That stops the cover from distorting and stops any possibility of oil leaks when it all goes back together. And of course we've already found some rather strange screw sizes and left-handed threads, and you must be prepared to come across this kind of thing when you are working on old British classic bikes. Right, well, have we got all the screws out of that, yeah?
Yeah, that's them all.
Super, and the cover's actually come loose, it's playing ball, sometimes you still can't. So if I hold that down, hopefully you can just waggle the cover loose and just pop it safely out of the way.
There you go. What is everything there?
Okay, this might look a bit complicated on the face of it, but it's fairly simple stuff once you get used to what there is flying around inside British bikes. Okay. First of all, this bit here is your alternator. This bit spins around when the engine's running and it makes electrical power, and that charges the battery and keeps the lights running, etc, etc. And the first thing I've noticed here, I've got to say, can you see the state of that nut?
That has been chewed somewhat, hasn't it?
Somebody's been bashing that around with a chisel, which I'm afraid isn't very encouraging if that's the kind of maintenance it's had. However, nothing else looks too desperately bodged at this stage. But what you've got here then, this device here is actually the clutch. This is the bit that connects the gearbox to the rest of the engine. And the clutch connects to the engine by this chain here, and that's called the primary chain. Because they used to call this one a secondary chain at the back, so you'd have a primary chain and a secondary chain. Now the primary chain does wear slack while the engine's running, so there's a tensioner to keep it adjusted, which is there.
That's there.
If you ever need to adjust your chain tension, you do it as part of a service, but that's actually fine like that. The problem we've got at the moment is this clutch, which is slipping. On a British bike, when you operate the Kickstarter, it drives the engine through the clutch. Now, Japanese bikes work slightly differently. Right. But the problem is here, when we're putting full load on the Kickstarter, that's slipping around. Now, I'm hoping that we won't have to strip the clutch right down to fix it, but we can adjust it. That's the adjuster that I had a go at there to get the operating mechanism working properly, but it still didn't do the job. So what I want to do now is try tightening these 4 screws slightly. Okay. Each one of those has a spring underneath it, and those are the springs that hold the clutch together. Now, in order to do that, you can use just a great big monster screwdriver. But I have here, this is actually, believe it or not, the genuine BSA service tool for the job.
So a genuine antique.
It certainly is, yes, I've had that for years. And you will notice as well that it's been rather subtly modified by having a big bolt welded onto it, which gives you a little bit more purchase. If you try hooking that into there, and what I'm going to suggest is just give each one of those 4 screws a single turn. Okay. If you turn that inwards, and just be careful you don't scratch your side panel as you go down. And you're actually turning against spring pressure, so there will feel to be a bit of resistance. And all you're doing there is adding a little bit more spring tension to the clutch. So that should make the clutch a bit tighter, and hopefully it means that we'll be able to kickstart the engine properly. After the cover came off, we first of all had a look at the alternator, and there's obvious signs of bodgery on the main nut that holds it all together. We had a quick look at the primary chain, and that's actually in fine condition. And finally, I asked Ian to adjust the clutch spring nuts, which will increase tension on the clutch and hopefully will stop it slipping. How did you come to own this bike? Because it's quite a change to the other bikes that you've had in the past, isn't it?
It certainly is a change. I actually bought it over the internet. I did everything that I would advise anybody else not to do. Right. It was a moment of madness. I just decided I want a little bit of a project. I saw this bike on the internet. I thought I'm gonna have that bike.
Right. You saw a little grainy JPEG on a computer screen.
Yeah, that's basically what it was. Right. I mean, the bike itself was based down in South Wales, and I'm up in Scotland, so it wasn't really practical to actually go and see the bike.
Several hundred miles you've had to travel to buy the bike, though.
Oh, I didn't actually do the travelling myself. I actually got it transported up to me after I'd actually paid for it.
So you didn't even see the bike until it was delivered to your door?
Not until it was delivered to my door.
Wow, that's quite a lot of confidence you had in buying it.
Yeah, as I say, it was something that I would advise anybody else not to do. Right. Okay, I think I've been lucky with this one. I got in touch with a chap that was actually selling it through email, got copies of documents sent through, everything looked fine. So I sent off the cheque and the bike arrived. Yeah,
so you took some sensible precautions as much as you could.
As much as I could, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, shall we go back and have a crack at this BSA and see if we can go a bit further with it?
Yeah, I think we need to.
Okay, ready for round 2?
Yep.
Right, we've managed to put Ian's bike back together, so now for the moment of truth. Is it going to start? Ian, do you want to have a go at firing her up?
Yeah, we'll have a go.
I've got both my fingers crossed. Whoa, you got the ignition on?
Oh, that does help.
Signs of life.
Nearly.
It's a bit of a technique this after Japanese, right? Whoa.
Do you want to give it a go? I haven't got the technique.
Can we swap positions? Do you want to come round this side?
Okay.
And do a little dance around it. Let's see if she'll behave for me. There we go.
Right, it's going.
That actually sounds quite healthy. I'm quite pleased with that. But she's not going to keep running. Alright, you've put a new carburettor on here, haven't you, Ian?
Yes, that's right.
Sounds like we're going to have to do a little bit of tinkering on that to get it to run properly. So come back in part 2 and we'll have a go at setting the carburettor up.